Hello, welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 185, and I am the show's host, Kyle. On today's show, I want to talk about Mike Pompeo's bid to become Secretary of State. I'm going to update the Korean peace process and how North and South Korea continue to move in the right direction. For those of you who want to share this show, because I think I got a lot of very important information for everyone today, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. And you can find the show at libertarianinstitute.org. My own news website is immersionnews.com, and there you can find almost anything I talk about in the shows. Alright, everybody, let's start with the Mike Pompeo thing. So Trump nominated Mike Pompeo to become next Secretary of State after firing Rex Tillerson. Now, Tillerson's already out of, the job, and there's an acting Secretary of State. However, Mike Pompeo has gone through the committee hearing in the Senate, but faced somewhat of a stonewall. All the Democrats on the committee have vowed to vote against Mike Pompeo, and there's 21 people on the Foreign Relations Committee. 11 Republicans on that committee. 10 of them said that they would support Mike Pompeo, but the 11th was Senator Rand Paul, who came out and said, absolutely, I will not vote for Mike Pompeo to become Secretary of State. He's an unqualified warmonger, though not necessarily Rand Paul's words, but basically said that, the man preferred violence to peace, supported regime change efforts, and generally an interventionist foreign policy. And Rand Paul had rightfully identified this as a threat to the American people because Mike Pompeo's policies, regime change in Iran, would cause more people to hate us. It would bring a massive loss of wealth, not only in the scene, the sending the aircraft carriers and the missiles over there, and some of that stuff's going to get blown up and destroyed, but also in the unseen where all that money could have gone into what people it could have helped, or even just stayed in the pockets of business owners and families to spend the money and do what they please with it. But Mike Pompeo is a firm interventionist, and no doubt a war with Iran would also cost a lot of American lives as well. And so Rand Paul, took the stand and was great on the issue. And then this would have been Monday the 23rd. I'm scrolling through Twitter and I see that Rand Paul says he talked to Donald Trump about Mike Pompeo. And Donald Trump promised that Mike Pompeo doesn't want a nation build. He wants to get out of Afghanistan. And Rand Paul says, well, now I support Mike Pompeo. I gotta say, guys, this one, really hurt. In that Senator Rand Paul is somebody who could traditionally be counted on to at least make stands on somewhat important issues in the Senate on these foreign policy things and try to prevent the worst case scenario from happening. However, this isn't the same Rand Paul that filibustered over drone strikes. This is, the kind of Rand Paul that supported arming the Kurds, apparently. Rand Paul obviously should know that the word of this director of the CIA means absolutely nothing. The word of Donald Trump means absolutely nothing. Just because they tell him that Mike Pompeo is going to be a good non-interventionist doesn't make it so. Rand Paul has the track record. He has the speeches. He gave pretty good questioning to Mike Pompeo during the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I mean, it was clear that Rand Paul does not endorse the Mike Pompeo worldview. Yet now you have Rand Paul supporting Mike Pompeo on the Foreign Relations Committee. Now, I don't want to go through Mike Pompeo's complete history because I really did that, and I think I did a pretty good job on Foreign Policy Focus 167, and I'll go ahead and link to that show in the show notes page for those of you who want to, kind of get the whole story on Mike Pompeo. Now, I guess in fairness to Rand Paul, and people have been pointing this out to me, and that is, if Rand Paul didn't support Mike Pompeo, it seemed that what the Republicans were going to do is just bring this to a floor vote rather than have the committee vote. Now, the committee vote wouldn't necessarily prevent Mike Pompeo. It's basically just saying that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee stamps its approval on him. But it's not actually a meaningful kind of thing that has to be done. And so they say that in somewhat of a practical argument, Rand Paul really couldn't have prevented Mike Pompeo from becoming Secretary of State anyways. But at the same time, now Rand Paul is giving him his endorsement. No Secretary of State, I believe, ever in the United States became Secretary of State without getting the endorsement of the Foreign Relations Committee, no matter how political it is and how there's probably never been good people on the Foreign Relations Committee anyways, that this would have been a real black mark for Mike Pompeo, and it might have caused him, to have a lot of explaining to do, and we hadn't yet gotten the actual vote on Mike Pompeo, and so maybe we would have been able to sway a couple people on him. However, Rand Paul's endorsement seems to be enough to get him through, and so Mike Pompeo will likely be Secretary of State by the weekend. Now, the other negative thing here isn't just that Mike Pompeo becomes Secretary of State. It means Mike Pompeo doesn't stay at the CIA director position. And we're getting Gina Haspel, who's probably even worse. And I believe on the same episode that I discussed Mike Pompeo's nomination, I also discussed Gina Haspel. Gina Haspel was involved in the torture program. She was involved in covering up the torture program. And so is a war criminal. It has no business being a CIA director. And like I said, I'm not going to go over all my arguments against her because I already went over them in that episode. But a torturer shouldn't be the director of the CIA. And that brings me to something else that really got on my nerves over the weekend. And that is, as you scroll through mainstream media outlets, especially CNN and MSNBC, but even Huffington Post, Salon, Jezebel, those kind of sites, you see people saying how they have the picture at Barbara Bush's funeral of Obama and Clinton and George Sr. and George Jr. and Melania Trump, and saying how much better of company Melania Trump is with these people rather than her husband, Donald Trump. Now, my point here isn't to defend Donald Trump, but George Bush authorized a program where random men were kidnapped from their homes all over the Middle East, but, specifically Afghanistan, sent to CIA sites with no proof of their guilt, with no record of this occurring, with no public knowledge of it, and tortured those people, sometimes to death, sometimes for years. He started a war in Iraq that he had to know was based on false information. He scared the American people into that war. He talked about how we couldn't wait for the evidence that Iraq had mass destruction because waiting could mean that a nuclear weapon would go off in an American city. And that war killed 4,500 Americans. It's cost Americans trillions of dollars, and who knows what those opportunity costs in America are and how many American lives could have been saved. And, all the veterans that have come back and, have suffered either physical injuries or mental injuries and have, committed suicide or are now addicted to opium. That's all the fault of George Bush. And then his successor, Barack Obama, doesn't prosecute him, doesn't prosecute anyone for those crimes. But he smiles in a picture with George Bush, right? And so, he has some culpability too there. If you're the person that is tasked with justifying and making right crimes of the murder of 1 million people unnecessarily and the torture of hundreds unnecessarily, the murder of some of those people, it's unforgivable. It's inexcusable. You can't let Obama off the hook for that. And then, of course, he started his own war in Libya that, to this day, people are still drowning in the Mediterranean Sea because of his war in that country, because of the destabilization he created. People are being raped to death in Libya. People are being sold to slaves as Libya because of Barack Obama's war. And so to say that Melania is somehow in better company because she's surrounded by these warmongers and war criminals and torturers, and in Obama's case, a murderer, he had a kill list. He targeted drone strikes at people that killed innocent people. Same thing with George Bush. It's inexcusable to me to be able to make this oversight, to be so okay with the Afghanistan war, with the Iraq war, with the Libya war, with the torture program, with the targeted drone program, with the signature strikes that killed first responders and rescuers, people coming to help innocent people, the victims of American drone strikes, the genocide that Saudi Arabia is committing in Yemen, endorsing that. Sometimes it's hard to know what to say, that nobody seems to realize that is so much worse than, the terrible things that Donald Trump has said. And now Donald Trump is committing his own war crimes, but that's the one thing that they won't convict him for. In fact, Adam Johnson, who writes at FAIR, which is a pretty good organization, what they kind of do is they go through and look at what the media is reporting on and what they're saying. And so he says of the top 100 American newspapers, only 26 of them ran op-eds on the Syria strikes that Donald Trump carried out against Bashar al-Assad targets. But all 26 of those were favorable towards the strike. Now, some, did this kind of wishy-washy, well, he should have gotten congressional approval, and we don't think the strikes really did enough. But nobody said he should have waited for the evidence. And so, yeah, Donald Trump's a war criminal too, and Donald Trump's not a good person. But as of right now, if you're looking at death counts, Well, 500,000 Iraqi children starved to death under Bill Clinton's time in office. 1 million Iraqis died under the war waged on lies by George Bush. Barack Obama put his stamp of approval on all those wars and ignored all those crimes. And then, continued to wage wars of his own that have killed hundreds of thousands, if not more today. And so, Donald Trump's, I'm sure, responsible for 100,000 or so deaths at this point, but, he's really lagging behind his predecessors. And of course, the beneficiaries of all of this are the weapons makers like Lockheed Martin, who just got another $1 billion contract to develop some hypersonic missiles. So, of course, these are going to be weapons, I suppose, to try to have first strike capabilities on Russia and, wage one of these wars that will kill absolutely anyone. Everybody should go back and listen to the last show. Will Porter was on talking about his recent article dealing with the Ukraine bid to join NATO and what this means for U.S.-Russian relations. But as we put on the show, that the risk here is that the United States and Russia have enough nuclear weapons to wipe out every human being on the planet, and this is a real problem. And so it's real important that these governments maybe don't have to get along super well, but they certainly have to communicate and be non-hostile towards each other. All right, some other things I want to talk about. Cuba, Raul Castro steps down. I'm sure most of you know this. He did retain his leadership of the Communist Party in Cuba, which is, I think, probably, if not the most powerful, the second most powerful position. And it seems that a successor or somebody that he wanted to succeed him. The new president or leader, whoever the title is of Cuba, is Miguel Diaz-Canel. My guess is that this guy is, new boss, same as the old boss situation there. However, these situations always present a new opportunity for talks. Maybe this is a good way for Trump to kind of capitalize on the momentum from Korea and say, well, now that Castro's gone, I can finally make a deal with the Cubans and, go about it that way. It's not exactly the truth, but it sounds like a good thing to me. Korean peace. First bit of good news is that it seems the United States has toned down their war games with South Korea this year. They are using, I think, just the USS Wasp, which is one of their new destroyers and a pretty sophisticated one at that. The F-35s, I believe, could do the horizontal launches from those ships. I'm not sure if there's actually F-35s deployed to the Wasps right now. However, there's usually a carrier strike group involved in these war games. So, this is a significant reduction in force. I believe the war games are occurring for a shorter amount of time. And at least in this case, that Donald Trump isn't actively undermining the Korean peace and seems to at least be taking the steps that he needs to take in order to allow the North Koreans to get, the Koreans, people in general, to get along better. In preparations for the upcoming talks, the South Koreans have shut down propaganda megaphones, I guess they station along the DMZ. Those megaphones, I guess, play music and news updates that the Korean people could hear. I'm guessing, playing K-pop music and talking about how the average income in South Korea is $500,000 a year, and they have a drug problem, not a food problem. Just that kind of general propaganda stuff. But again, this is just a step to show that the Koreans are looking to reconcile their differences. And no, it's not denuclearization. And this is one of the disappointing things I'm seeing from the mainstream media on the Korea issue, is they're not celebrating that the Koreans are taking steps towards peace. You have a hotline set up between the North Korean and South Korean leadership that they could call each other, I guess, whenever they need to discuss serious issues between the two countries. This is a huge step for de-escalation if there's ever conflict, and a very important hotline to have. But they always frame it as, well, North Korea hasn't given up their nuclear weapons yet. Trump might get snookered by Kim Jong-un. North Korea and the South are all liars, and so Trump has to worry about getting lied to here. And forget the point that North Korea has given up their demands that U.S. troops withdraw from South Korea. It seems that North Korea is willing to, stop missile tests, stop nuclear tests, and shut down nuclear test sites before talks with the United States even happen. And this isn't being celebrated in the mainstream media. Everybody's like, well, North Korea still hasn't given away everything for nothing yet. And so that shows that they might be lying to Donald Trump. And that means Donald Trump shouldn't even talk to them. It's frustrating, especially when you look at the polling numbers. 75% of South Koreans want peace with North Korea. Only 13% don't. Let the people, a lot of these people in the media are the same ones that lecture about how, the white patriarchy or whatever is trying to force all their positions on other people. And yet here we are with a country, a peninsula, a group of people demanding peace. And the middle part of North America, all the way on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, is enforcing their rule and their will there. It seems to me that that's the height of that kind of ignorance and terrible, ideas. Afghanistan stuff. On April 15th, I saw Free Radio Europe or whatever announce that there's a voter registration drive in Afghanistan. This is because they're looking to have legitimate elections in October. And so it seems that the Taliban and ISIS have taken the position that they're going to try to undermine these elections by attacking the voter registration sites. In the first week of these voter registrations, 5 people were kidnapped from 1 voter registration site, 2 voter registers, and 3 police. That was by the Taliban. 57 were killed in a suicide bombing in Kabul on a voter registration site. ISIS-K is claiming responsibility for that attack. An attack yet to have somebody claim responsibility for killed 6 members of the same family in another bombing of a voter registration facility. And so, it's the American people forcing our way of life on the people of Afghanistan, that we think that we want them to have the correct government, and our correct government, at least in the belief of the American people, is that everybody goes out and votes on whoever they want to be ruled by, and then at the end we all come together and sing Kumbaya and agree that, they won, so we're all gonna listen to them for the next 4 years. Of course, that's a pretty rosy picture to paint what happens in America, but this is, of course, what we're saying we're going to bring to Afghanistan. However, the people of Afghanistan don't believe that way. The geography of the country doesn't necessarily make it so that everybody feels interconnected, and so, it seems very clear to me that the people of northern Afghanistan, the Hazaras, the Tajiks, the Turkmen, don't necessarily believe in the same kind of culture and society as the Pashtun. And so for that reason, somebody, if you're running a government this way, somebody is always going to be on the receiving end of that government and feel like their culture and their way of life is being taken away by the government. And in some cases, these are steps that, most of us, human rights would say are in the right direction, but not all of them are. And there's going to be, injustices forced upon whoever's losing the election. And so the Pashtuns calculate that that's going to be them. And so it looks like the Taliban are really going to step up and carry out some attacks on these voter registration facilities, because the people are afraid to go register to vote, that nobody's going to vote, and that will undermine the elections. I read a report that 3 people were beheaded by ISIS-K in Afghanistan. I recently read that they killed the leader. Killing the leadership of these terrorist groups really doesn't move us in the right direction. Few quick updates on Syria. The OPCW finally visited the Duma site. The Pentagon said that the attacks on Assad damaged but didn't destroy Assad's chemical weapons capabilities. Of course, this means that the next time some jihadists carry out a false flag, the United States government is going to bite right into the fact that, it must have been Assad. And of course, the reason anybody would have a contrarian position like myself is that we are either influenced by our Russian bot. Real quick, just to talk about Yemen, because it's hard to talk about Yemen because the news is always horrific. It's always that more innocent little children are starving to death and dying of cholera, or being bombed to death and dismembered by U.S. made bombs dropped by U.S. made planes, flown by U.S. trained Saudi princes. But that's exactly what's going on here. The political leader of Yemen was killed last Thursday. A new leader was elected, and then the Yemeni government, and this is the government of North Yemen, or the territory controlled by the Houthis. I'm trying to do some research and figure out if this person actually holds any real power, or if all the power in Yemen is held by militias. As far as what goes on under Houthi control, I'm really not sure. I haven't read anything that suggests the new leader of Yemen would be any more likely to pursue a different policy than the previous administration there. One thing that stood out in this story to me is that this guy was killed. However, it was kept under wraps until a new leadership was elected. And this seems to me to suggest that there must be somewhat tight control over what's going on in Houthi-controlled territory by the Houthis. The leader died at the port of Hadada, which is a town away from the capital city of Sana'a, where you would imagine the capital where the leader would normally operate. And they were able to keep that quiet until a new leader was elected. So it seems to be worth noting. Over the weekend, Saudi Arabia dropped a bomb on a wedding, in Yemen and killed 33 people, the bride and 17 children and women. It's absolutely horrific. Of course, this is at least as disturbing to me. I don't know how it would be any less disturbing bombing a group of women and children at a wedding than what Assad is alleged to have done in Syria. And yet we're going to continue to support Saudi Arabia, continue to make it possible for Saudi Arabia to do this to the people of Yemen. And we're going to pretend to take this huge, courageous, moral stand in Syria. It's just ridiculous. And so if anybody gets a chance, it's so hard sometimes to talk about the situation in Yemen just because it's so horrific. It's not like dinner conversation or anything like that. But if we can build a consensus that the war in Yemen is the wrong thing to do, and everybody just knows that the United States is aiding a genocide in Yemen, then maybe our politicians will finally stand up and do something about it. Last thing I want to discuss, and I'll do this quickly, Return March Friday, this past Friday, 4 people dead, 1 boy, 14 years old. I saw the video. I'll link to it in the show notes page for those of you who want to subject yourself to that. It's horrific. He's 50 meters, from the border, or the fence there. In the prison he's lived in his entire life. This boy is clearly not like any kind of 14-year-old boy who could ever present a threat to anyone. Very small, and is shot in the head, side of the head, and drops dead. And again, nobody demands justice. This is on camera. It's horrific. It's a U.S. ally doing it, and nobody cares. So again, just like the situation in Yemen, when you have a chance to talk to people about this, and it's hard to do, but we gotta build that consensus that Israel is killing Palestinian children, and we shouldn't tolerate it anymore. All right, that's where I'm gonna wrap up today's show. I got one really exciting announcement, and that is the news roundup that I do every day and publish at libertarianinstitute.org now has its own section. It used to appear in the blog, but now the guys at Libertarian Institute, Scott Horton, Jared LaBelle, Sheldon Richmond, have given me this opportunity, to have my own little section on the website there. So really cool. So everybody check that out. It's right on the top right corner of the page there above the blog. That is at libertarianinstitute.org. This show, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. My own news site is immersionnews.com. The show is on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean. Apparently didn't even know it was up there. iHeartRadio. So however you want to check it out, you could do that. Wherever you watch or listen to the show, please give me a rating and review. It helps to, bump my show up in the rankings and how early people see it. With a show with a, title like Foreign Policy Focus, if somebody is doing a general search and the show does have good rating and reviews, that's a really good way for people to find it. So, think about doing that. It would really help me out. And, I appreciate it, guys, and I hope you enjoyed today's show.